Welcome to another edition of History and Whateva with me, James Manning III. And today is kind of a very special episode of History and Whateva because I will be releasing this on Martin Luther King Day, 2024. I've always been a really big fan. I mean, it's strange to say fan of someone like Martin Luther King, but I am. I've read his autobiography, which was put together after his untimely death by his family and people close to him, and it has some extraordinary speeches and segments of speeches within that. And, every Martin Luther King Day, I like to listen to at least one of his speeches and to try to gain a little bit more insight on this incredible person who stands out in history among some of the most enormous characters. I mean, if you ask me how much Martin Luther King stands out amongst historical figures, I would say he's up there with Alexander the Great. You know, these people who just stand out because of their incredible accomplishments in their lives. Alexander is probably not the greatest one to compare him with, but in terms of historical fame and the amount of respect that I have for Martin Luther King Jr. is paramount. I can't really think of another figure who I appreciate their work more, regardless of where they come from or what background they have. Martin Luther King is one who has spoken to me for my whole life. So every year I try to do just something to point people in the direction of one of his speeches or some of his work. I have been to the Mountaintop to analyze and hopefully prompt others to go and listen to the speech in its entirety and enjoy it and appreciate it for what it really is saying and how wonderfully profound it is, and to perhaps have families sit down and listen to it. You know, I always struggle with finding a way to relate this material because it's such a difficult thing to try to make entertaining, because the struggle for racial equality is not funny. Although one thing that Martin Luther King Jr. is quite good at is being able to take such an incredibly serious subject, which was his life's work, alongside of being a pastor and delivering sermons to the churches at which he was asked to preside. But he always found a way to insert some humor. So I'm going to include a few different videos in, videos and perhaps the transcript if you'd like to read the full transcript. And I will provide the video on YouTube of his full speech. It's just, it doesn't have like a full video of him giving the speech, but it does have the speech recorded, and of which I have listened to it several times. So I think that it's important that we give a little background to this incredibly monumental speech, "I Have Been to the Mountaintop" by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. King was somehow summoned to Memphis, Tennessee, because he had heard of the struggles of the sanitation workers there. And what happened, from what I could gather, was that the sanitation workers were mostly black people in Memphis, Tennessee, and they were working, there were other white people who were working, but they were, of course, like always in American history, they were disenfranchised. They weren't paid as much. There was something that happened where it was like pouring down rain, and they were told to take refuge in the overhang of the back of the truck. And, hey, you guys got to keep working, where others would be able to go home and get pay. The African-American workers at that time would be sent home without pay. So there was a lot of very inequitable practices being demonstrated by the sanitation sector, by the city. And it was so bad that, in fact, there was an incident where 2 people were killed being crushed in the back of that truck, and it set off a big protest. And then after that, that's when Martin Luther King arrived. And he was there to give a little help to the movement. He went wherever he was needed. And it seemed like he was needed in Memphis, Tennessee, because the workers were on strike. And their slogan that they came up with was, "I am a man." Interesting that the slogan, that's all that was required, because that's what they wanted, to be treated as people, not as some second-class citizen. So that's where Martin Luther King decided to come down to help these, folks who were in bad situation, just trying to do a job for the city to help keep it clean and healthy and safe for everybody who lived there. And a very difficult job that is. Now, this speech was given on April 3rd, 1968. And, it was supposed to be Ralph Abernathy, who was the keynote speaker. And I guess MLK wasn't feeling very good, and he didn't intend to give a speech, but everyone was calling for him to stand up and give a speech. So he did. And he delivered 45 minutes of one of the most excellent performances of public speaking that I have ever come across. At least, that's my opinion. And it's a very poignant, strategic, and wonderfully stated speech. So this speech was given April 3rd, 1968, at the Mason Temple. And this church was full of people, incredibly full. It was in the thousands. And there was a storm warning going on, and they were there anyhow. People left their houses, even though it was a storm and raining hard, and they went to see what they could do. So in the beginning of this speech, MLK starts talking about if he could have a panoramic view of history, which, and God asked him, hey, which age would you like to live in? He kind of takes you on this small tour, a small journey of the mind. First, he would journey to Egypt and watch the journey of the Jewish peoples who escaped slavery and went across the Red Sea. And he'd also like to go and see Mount Olympus and see Plato and Socrates at the Parthenon, and to see the development of the Roman Empire and the Renaissance, and to see Martin Luther, of which he holds his namesake, attach the 95 Theses, or thesis, I'm not exactly sure how it's supposed to say, but to see Martin Luther attach those famous papers to the door of the church. And to go back and see in 1863, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. And he'd like to go back to the 1930s and see a president trying to rebuild his nation out of depression and say the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. He wanted to see that. But his answer was, if I could only live in the 20th century for a few years, I will be happy. Of course, I can't state anything half as eloquently as he did, because I'm sort of a degenerate comedian. But, here, what he said was, I would even come up to the early 30s and see a man grappling with the problems of bankruptcy of his nation, and come with an eloquent cry that we have nothing to fear but fear itself. I wouldn't stop there. Strangely enough, I would turn to the Almighty and say, if you allow me to live just a few years in the second half of the 20th century, I will be happy. Whoa. Even from the first lines of the speech, he is setting the tone. He is setting the tone, and it is a very sort of solemn tone, where to me, it looks like he's looking death in the face and smiling and not being afraid. Because all he wants to live is a few years in the second half of the 20th century. How incredibly strong a wordsmith that he is. This is why I have so much admiration, because what an incredible amount of feats he was able to sustain and to help others sustain and be the head moving forward of all of these most important happenings of the 20th century for racial equality, and which we still struggle with today. But could you imagine what it would have been like without someone like him? I can't. And that's why I always have to go back to these. And he states something strange is happening. People are rising up and they want to be free. He's talking about all the protests that are happening. And one of the things that he says early on in the speech, here, I'll just read it for you. Men for years now have been talking about war and peace, but now no longer can they just talk about it. It is no longer a choice between violence and nonviolence in this world. It is nonviolence or non-existence. That is where we are today. Also, in the human rights revolution, if something isn't done, and done in a hurry, the whole world is doomed. And he says, I quote, "Now I am just happy that God has allowed me to live in this period, to see what is unfolding, and I am happy that he has allowed me to be in Memphis." Now, I'm not a religious guy, but this is very strong. He's not playing. His life has actually been threatened, not only threatened, but attempted to be taken a few times by this point. And he still goes on. He says, now what does all this mean in this great period of history? It means that we've got to stay together. We've got to stay together and maintain unity. Boom. Stay together, maintain unity. I mean, these are words that just ring true no matter what you undertake. And it always makes me wonder about all of this division that we see today, and where is it coming from? And I think it's something that he was saying back then. One of the strange things is that he always finds a way to implant something funny. And I really appreciate that, because that's something that all good speakers do. The next lines in the speech are, the issue is the refusal of Memphis to be fair and honest in its dealings with the public servants who happen to be sanitation workers. Now, we've got to keep attention on that. That's always the problem with a little violence. You know what happened the other day in the press dealt only with the window breaking. I read the articles. The very seldom got around to mentioning the fact that 1,300 sanitation workers are on strike and that Memphis is not being fair to them. And the mayor, Loeb, I think it's Loeb, is in dire need of a doctor that didn't get around to that. Now we're going to march again. And we've got to march again in order to put the issue where it's supposed to be and force everybody to see that there are 1,300 of God's children here suffering, sometimes going hungry, going through the dark and dreary nights, wondering how this is going to come out. That's the issue. Something about living in the time that we live in, we're very fortunate because I have total access to all of this great information. The way he said it, the transcript, the videos, other videos of people who were there who witnessed him give this speech and were at the protests. Well, he says something in here that's very interesting. Now, what does all this mean in this great period of history? It means that we've got to stay together. We've got to stay together and maintain unity. You know, whenever Pharaoh wanted to prolong the period of slavery in Egypt, he had a favorite formula for doing it. What was that? He kept the slaves fighting among themselves. But whenever the slaves get together, something happens in Pharaoh's court, and he cannot hold the slaves in slavery. When the slaves get together, that is the beginning of getting out of slavery. Now let us maintain unity. Whoa. Whoa. So, that's it. You know, he's talking about these things in 1968. About how, the key of the ruling classes is to keep the lower classes, the poorer people, fighting among themselves so that they never really go after the person who's causing the problem. And he recognized that even back then. Let us maintain unity. Sanitation workers deserved it. The protesting is, it's covered a lot like it is today, where they only show the window breaking that he's talking about. Not that there's 1,300 sanitation workers who need higher wages and health care and time off and just the regular stuff that unions have brought us that people deserve and to maintain their dignity as laborers. And it's something that we take for granted, like, weekends. We have weekends because of labor unions. And it was, I think that's an excellent point that Dr. King was bringing up there, is that we need to be united. And he even says it specifically. That's the issue. And we've got to say to the nation, we know how it's coming out. For when people get caught up in that which is right, and they are willing to sacrifice for it, there is no stopping point short of victory. Listen to that. I'm always blown away by the elocution and the economy of words and this wordsmithing that he's able to do. In that short statement, that there is so much packed into there that I almost think it would be hard to not be moved. You would have to physically stop yourself from expressing how you feel about that incredible few lines. And a lot of this reminds me of when the protesting was happening just recently, 2020. And there's probably still more protests that go on, but it's all the same. As he goes on a little bit later to say that we are masters in our nonviolent movement in disarming police forces. They don't know what to do. Yeah, that's the truth. If all they have is violence and you only use nonviolence, it's very hard to get around that because the human psyche has a difficult dealing with that. And it's strange. I'm just going to keep kind of reading these quotes from it because I can't really express a way. I can't say anything better than he did. I can only relate it to my experience, which is whatever, dude. It's much different. And he goes into talking about the dogs that they were sent on them. They sick dogs on them. Let me see. Bull Connor, I believe, was the... So Bull Connor, he was a politician who served also as the Commissioner of Public Safety for the city of Birmingham, Alabama for more than 2 decades. And he's the one who sent the dogs forth. He says, from MLK's speech again, and Bull Connor would tell them to send the dogs forth, and they did come. But we just went before the dogs singing, ain't gonna let nobody turn me round. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round. Not dogs. And then he talks about the fire hoses. And that was the fact that there was a certain kind of fire that no water could put out. Bull Connor next would say, turn the fire hoses on. As I said to you the other night, Bull Connor didn't know history. He knew a kind of physics that somehow didn't relate to the trends physics that we knew about. And that was the fact that there was a certain kind of fire that no water could put out. And we went before the fire hoses. We had known water. If we were Baptist or some other denominations, we had been immersed. If we were Methodist and some others, we had been sprinkled. But we knew water, and that couldn't stop us. We just went on before the dogs, and we would look at them, and we'd go before the water hoses, and we'd look at it, and we'd just go on singing. Over my head, I see freedom in the air. I almost feel like I just want to read the whole thing. And I can't do that. But, he talks about, hey, and then we'd be thrown into the paddy wagons, and they packed us in there like sardines, and old Bull would say, take 'em all. And they did. And he's like, we'd just go on singing, we shall overcome. And they got to the jail, and even the jailers were moved by their prayers and singing. Now, I am going to read this part verbatim. A lot of that, I'm trying to just convey the points in this speech that were so moving to me. But when I talk about how he brings a little bit of humor, and there was a power there was a power there which Bull Connor couldn't adjust to. So we ended up transforming Bull into a steer. And we won our struggle in Birmingham. Now we've got to go on in Memphis just like that. I call upon you to be with us when we go out Monday. So we ended up transforming that bull into a steer, and we won our struggle in Birmingham. For those of you who aren't aware, I actually had to look this up. What's the difference between a bull and a steer? Mainly testicles. Basically, he's saying we just continued on in our nonviolent struggle, and we pacified that raging bull and turned him into a bull. We turned that bull into a steer who's no longer a threat to us. You just be off nibbling sweet grass. He didn't say that. That's me, of course, but that's funny. That's funny. I mean, this guy who's literally looking death in the face day by day as he moves through Memphis, Tennessee, and you can feel the tension that he, I'm sure, had received many death threats. And there were injunctions that he talked about to try to keep them from marching. And he deals with this in a very wonderful way. All we say to America is, be true to what you've said on paper. If I lived in China or even Russia or any totalitarian country, maybe I could understand some of these illegal injunctions. Maybe I could understand the denial of certain basic First Amendment privileges because they hadn't committed themselves to that over there. But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is in the right to protest for right. And so, as I say, we aren't going to let dogs or water hoses turn us around. We aren't going to let any injunction turn us around. We are going on. Like I said, it's crazy to live in the time that we do because so much work has been done for us. I mean, there's no reason to try to state these things any differently because they're said so incredibly concisely by Martin Luther in this speech of his. And I mean, this is the kind of thing that in my opinion, that a true patriot would say because he's looking out for his fellow Americans to live up to the greatness at which was written down by the founding fathers of the United States. They didn't exclude people. They said what they said. And it permeates throughout history. And that's something that MLK was putting here. He's like, look, we have rights. And we have the right to protest for it. And that's part of the greatness of America. You know, in a world that we live in today that is just so cut up into two pieces, and they use these two pieces to have us fight against each other, well, this is not necessary. Because, you know, if you know how this nation was founded, or at least what was written, we should all be entitled to that. Doesn't matter who you are. Anyway, I'm getting a little off in the weeds. We can go. As always, I can't help it. I like being in the weeds. You know, I try not to make light of a lot of the things that he says because they're said with such brevity. And they're said so concisely that sometimes they can be glossed over and you lose track of their meaning because it's very easy to just continue listening to the speech without doing any real analyzation. But I'm crazy enough that I want to listen to the speech over and over, and I want to look up the transcript, and I want to know what he says because I internalize it a little bit more each time. And it resonates with me because I believe in the right to protest for things that you believe in. For justice, liberty, freedom, equality, those things. Something else that he talks about in this speech really stands true today, and I wish that we would pay a little closer attention to it. Which is, he speaks a bit about the economic ways that you can protest. He says, we don't have to argue with anybody. We don't have to curse and go around acting bad with our words. We don't need any bricks and bottles. We don't need any Molotov cocktails. We just need to go around to these stores and to these massive industries in our country and say, God sent us here to say to you that you're not treating his children right. And we've come by here to ask you to make the first item on your agenda fair treatment where God's children are concerned. Now, if you are not prepared to do that, we do have an agenda that we must follow, and our agendas call for withdrawing economic support from you. I don't think you could put that any more concisely. If you want to really hurt an industry that isn't treating people correctly, don't buy their stuff. This is something that I think is kind of lost on American society today. It's that, I choose not to shop at Amazon. I don't order on Amazon. I don't shop at Walmart. I try not to buy, Coca-Cola products, just because I don't care for the way that they treat employees and the way some of their policies around the world and that kind of thing. That's my choice as a person, to just not shop at these places because I don't like the way they act towards their employees or human beings in general. He goes on to say, don't buy Coca-Cola in Memphis. Don't buy Wonder Bread. And here, back to the speech here. Now we must kind of redistribute the pain. We are choosing these companies because they haven't been fair in their hiring policies. And we are choosing them because they can begin the process of saying they are going to support the needs and the rights of these men who are on strike. And they can move on downtown and tell Mayor Loeb to do what is right. And he goes a little further, and he talks about a bank-in movement in Memphis and an insurance-in. It's pretty... These are things that we just don't hear, because what he was trying to do is to influence people to take their money out of a bank and put it into a bank, like a black-owned bank, and an insurance company that's black-owned. And that's what he was trying to do. He wanted to increase the ability of the protest by everyday situations. And that's extremely valuable. And I wish we would do more of that. And it's kind of strange that we, in this world today, we don't really hear much about that. It's like, oh, unions ain't so good, and, we're just gonna blah, blah. Nobody talks about how you can really change the way things work by doing some of these things. Just moving your business somewhere else, to somewhere that agrees more with your personal and moral compass. And at this point in the speech, he urges the people there to go to the protest the next day. He says, and when we have our march, you need to be there. If it means leaving work, if it means leaving school, be there. Be concerned about your brother. You may not be on strike, but either we go up together or we go down together. Let us develop a kind of dangerous unselfishness. How many lines in this speech absolutely are put so incredibly eloquently that they punch you in the psyche? Just an absolute strike to your mind. Let us develop a kind of dangerous unselfishness. Just that one line alone, the economy of words that he's using there, let us develop a kind of dangerous unselfishness. To help each other out can be an incredible weapon against this foolishness, this cruelty, this inequality. And, in order to drive this point home, he starts talking about the story of the Good Samaritan, right? How Jesus decided to stop as he was on this road, which they called the Bloody Pass, the Jericho Road, the road that leads from Jerusalem to Jericho. And it's a very dangerous one, and he describes it in there much better than I can. But it's very high up to very low. And it's a dangerous, wild, winding path. And a lot of people apparently were robbed along there. And he talks about that, how the priest and the Levite just walked by. And the reasons why they walked by, he speculates. One of the reasons he's talking about is he was, his Jewish ritual purity laws, where you can't touch people and still be pure for the ritual you're on your way to. That's one reason, or possibly that they were late for a meeting, or that they just didn't want to be fooled and be robbed themselves, and he was there just to lure them in. But, Jesus stopped and helped this guy. And the reason was, and I'm going to the speech here, so the first question that the priest asked, the first question that the Levite asked was, if I stop to help this man, what will happen to me? But then the Good Samaritan came by and he reversed the question. If I do not stop to help this man, what will happen to him? And I guess I'll just keep reading from this because I'm like, how do I put this? But we'll go back to the speech here. That is the question before you tonight. Not if I stop to help the sanitation workers, what will happen to my job? Not if I stop to help the sanitation workers, what will happen to all the hours that I usually spend in my office every day and every week as a pastor. The question is not, if I stop to help this man in need, what will happen to me? The question is, if I do not stop to help the sanitation workers, what will happen to them? That is the question. How many times can I be gut punched by these extraordinary words? It's like if you stop to absorb what is really being said in so few words, it will boggle your mind. But it's all in that point to develop this kind of dangerous unselfishness. And it's not dangerous to us, but it's dangerous to the establishment which wishes to carry on the injustice. Very dangerous. And I'll go back to this speech here. Let us rise up tonight with a greater readiness. Let us stand with a greater determination. And let us move on these powerful days, these days of challenge, to make America what it ought to be. And we have an opportunity to make America a better nation. And I want to thank God once more for allowing me to be here with you. I don't get into right and left arguments, okay? I'm not right and left. I never have voted right or left. Now, I only vote my conscience, and I don't let anybody else tell me one way or another. I look into things and try to shoot it as straight as I can. You can call me a centrist if you want, but I'm neither a Republican or a Democrat and never will be. Because this is what I believe as well. We have an opportunity to make America a better nation. We all do. But how wonderfully put. And the next point in this speech, it really takes a turn. Because he starts talking about the time that he was stabbed in the chest at a book signing in New York. Somebody came up and asked, are you Martin Luther King? And he said, yes, and then they stabbed him. And he was in the hospital, and they removed the blade, and they told him, here, let me just go from the speech. The blade had gone through, and the x-rays revealed that the tip of the blade was on the edge of my aorta. the main artery. Once that is punctured, you're drowned in your own blood, and that's the end of you. It came out in the New York Times the next morning that if I had merely sneezed, I would have died. Once again, the tone of this speech is defiantly staring into the eyes of death and saying, bring it on. He's seen it before. This isn't the first time that his life has been threatened, or that awful things had become around him because of his work that he so truly believed in, and remained nonviolent the whole time, and people committed acts of violence towards him. He was not daunted by this. It didn't change his resolve one bit. In fact, it strengthened it. Because when he was allowed to start moving around again in the hospital and he could read letters, he read a bunch of these letters. And I see, this is the kind of excellent speech writing and humor that I truly enjoy. It says here, I read a few, but one of them I'll never forget. I had received one from the president and the vice president. I had forgotten what those telegrams said. I received a visit and a letter from the governor of New York, but I have forgotten what that letter said. But there was another letter that came from a little girl, a young girl who was a student at the White Plains High School. I looked at that letter, and I'll never forget it. I'm just going to keep quoting here. I'll keep quoting because I have no choice. It said simply, Dear Dr. King, I am a 9th grade student at the White Plains High School. She said, while it should not matter, I would like to mention that I am a white girl. I read in the paper of your misfortune and of your suffering, and I read that if you had sneezed, you would have died. I'm simply writing you to say that I'm so happy that you didn't sneeze. He's like, yeah, I got the letter from the president and the vice president, the governor of New York, a bunch of gobbledygook. I don't know. I don't really remember, but I'm simply writing you to say that I'm so happy you didn't sneeze. And he really appreciated that. He says, if I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been around in 1960 to see the sitting in at lunch counters. And he phrases this a really good way because he says they were sitting in, but I know that they were really standing up. I might as well just read this too. I knew that as they were sitting in, they were really standing up for the best in the American dream and talking the whole nation back into those great wells of democracy, which were dug deep by the founding fathers in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. I just keep going back to it. Economy of words. Man, he really knows how to put these very concisely to bring the meaning up. And he goes and talks about 1961, where they called it a ride for freedom to end segregation in interstate travel. In 62, in Albany, Georgia, and where they decided to straighten their backs up. And whenever men and women straighten their backs up, they're going somewhere because a man can't ride your back unless it is bent. And he says again, if I had sneezed, he wouldn't have been there in 1963 to see what happened in Birmingham, Alabama, and aroused the consciousness of this nation and brought into being the Civil Rights Bill. He was glad that he got to do that because he almost didn't. And then he wouldn't have been able to give the I Have a Dream speech if he had sneezed. He wouldn't have seen Selma, Alabama and the movement there. And he wouldn't have seen Memphis. Right? He says, if I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been in Memphis to see community rally around those brothers and sisters who are suffering. I'm so happy I didn't sneeze. He lives for these accomplishments because he knows that they were worthwhile. And that death was coming. I mean, this whole speech has this sort of air of, I know my time is short here. And it's moving as you listen to it to decode that. and to taste that kind of bittersweet flavor. Taste in a speech. Yes, I smell, taste, feel this speech. Probably all of them that I've listened to, because I have such a appreciation and reverence for the work that this person did and the leadership qualities that he exhibited. He says here, the pilot said over the public address system, "We are sorry for the delay, but we have Dr. Martin Luther King on the plane. And to be sure that all of the bags were checked, and to be sure that nothing would be wrong on the plane, we had to check everything out carefully, and we've had the plane protected and guarded all night. Then I got to Memphis, and some began to say the threats, or talk about the threats that were out. What would happen to me from some of our sick white brothers? Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter with me because I have been to the mountaintop. I don't mind." So what he's talking about is people quite literally in Memphis, Tennessee were threatening his life. And he knew it. It really doesn't matter with me now because I have been to the mountaintop and I don't mind. All of his accomplishments he did with the threat looming over him that he might be killed. And the dogs and the water hoses, people throwing bricks, the injustice, the cruelty. But he didn't mind. He will move forward because it's something he believes in wholeheartedly and knows that it isn't wrong. And I guess I've read most of the speech already. But I might as well just read this last part. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He allowed me to go up to the mountain. I have looked over and I have seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. I'm so happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. Now, I want to remind everyone that I'm not a religious person and I'm not pushing any religion. I'm just merely restating what Dr. King said. And I'm restating that because MLK was assassinated the next day, April 4th, 1968, for trying to develop that sort of dangerous unselfishness. I don't want to be offensive and call him a warrior, but I mean, isn't that what a warrior does? It's not necessarily that you must take up the sword, but to resist, to fight for what you believe in and for your family. And, for him, it was greater. It wasn't just the rest of the people who had his struggle or looked like him, but it was about everyone. He didn't put any qualifications on truth or justice or liberty. And through this entire speech, you just feel that he knew that his time was coming to an end. And that's why I wanted to take some time and really do my best to give a bit of analyzation of this final speech. Because right up to the very end, he was always there, trying to not only fight against inequality, but also poverty. He just wanted to help make America a better place to live. He wanted to make it so we are living up in America to what we could be. As a nation, we have this wonderful opportunity to make America what it could be. And he never stopped. And he just had so much conviction and made it known to everyone to look the Grim Reaper in the face and say, I'm not afraid. And I will continue until I no longer can. And that's exactly what he did. And he even said it there. He said, I may not make it with you. I have looked over and I have seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. I may not get there with you. He didn't care that he made it or wouldn't make it or see what his accomplishments would show. You know, I know he wanted to. He said that. Longevity has its place. But he knew. He knew that his time was short. But the amount of bravery that it must have taken to continue after all of those threats. And it seems like maybe one got through to him to where he was pretty worried about it. But that is the essence of bravery. Where it's scary, but you go on anyway. Because whatever it is that you are non-violently fighting for is worth the risk. I'm just a comic. I'm just a philosopher, a nerd of history and many other nerdy things. But it's my small way of trying to move forward and to do my part to explore and analyze some of these speeches by one of the world's most honorable and eloquent speakers. A wielder of the pen unsurpassed by any I am aware of. And of course, on Martin Luther King Day, I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you to all the people who are associated with the civil rights movement in the United States, to all the people who had to deal with the dogs and the water hoses, and being jailed and put into a paddy wagon like sardines, because non-violence or non-existence, because the more violent you get, the more violence you bring. And MLK got violence forced upon him that he did not bring. So I am eternally grateful for the work that has been done in the past. And that's one reason why I do this podcast, is because there's been a lot of work already done. We don't have to go through trying to write this stuff. It's already here, and it's in all of its glory. Here it is for us to analyze and to learn from and to see how someone was able to put it to move towards their goals in a very pure and honorable manner. So, happy Martin Luther King Day, everyone. Go check out his speeches, read the books, take some time and appreciate all the work that's already been done for the good, for justice, for liberty, freedom, and equality. Have a good Martin Luther King Day. Thanks for listening. I'm James Manning III. We'll see you next time on History and Whatevea.